Hi, I'm Ashy and this is Crafty with Ashy. Welcome to my channel where I inspire creativity through just crafting, and for me that looks like painting, baking, and crocheting. Well, today though we're going to be talking about crocheting. So the question is, does using a bigger crochet hook use more or less yarn? So for this, I'm just going to come right out and tell you the answer. So if you're using the same pattern, so the same number of stitches across and the same number of rows, using a larger crochet hook will use more yarn. If you are looking for the same size of final project, right? So you want it to be a throw blanket, you want it to be 50 by 60 inches, right? So no matter what hook you use, you're gonna make the end result 50 by 60 inches. The larger crochet hook will use less yarn. So it depends which answer you're looking for, right? Are you doing the same pattern? If so, the larger crochet hook uses more. If you're looking for a final project size, the larger uses less. So let's go into actually what the amount of difference is, and then why those are the differences and how you can use those to your advantage. So first, I kind of did an experiment where I crocheted up different swatches and I compared the amount of yarn used. So the hooks that I chose to compare was a size I, which is a 5.5 millimeter hook, and a size N, which is a 10 millimeter hook. So this difference, in crochet hook size is fairly significant, but let's look at the difference that made in actual yarn usage, right? So when I compared these and I made the same pattern, right? So I did the same number of stitches across and the same number of rows. The smaller hook used 17% less yarn. So that means the larger one used 17% more yarn, right? And so that's quite a bit of difference, right? 17%. So now if we look at it the other way around, right? I'm looking for the same size final project. So let's look at that size 50 by 60 throw blanket, right? If I use the smaller hook, it will take me about 160 stitches across and 90 rows to get to that size. If I use the larger hook, it'll only take about 115 stitches across and 60 rows to get to that size. Now, this results in 30% less yarn used when I'm using the big hook. Now 30% is a lot, right? That's like giving your yarn 30% off. If you already bought it on sale, even better, right? Side note. But 30% less yarn by using the bigger hook. So why do we see this difference? Basically, and I have a couple swatches crocheted here for you that I'll show you, but basically using a larger hook means that you have looser stitches. So you have more airspace in each stitch, and less, respectively less yarn for the same amount of size, right? Because it's got more air into it. So if you are looking at that, my size I hook, and I'm going to try to get this nice and close for you, but my size I hook makes these. This is a weight 4 yarn. That's usually what's recommended, is the size I hook for this. And you see there's always going to be little holes in crochet, but for the most part, this is a pretty dense stitch, right? Whereas my size N hook, here is my swatch, and you can see it's a lot bigger, a lot airier. If you could feel it, it's a lot more flexible. It's a lot lighter. I know you can't feel it, but it's a very light and flexible swatch versus the tighter stitch. And then if you compare these sizes, okay, I'm going to try to stack them on top of each other so that you can see. The one in the back is the size N hook, and the one in the front is the I hook. And this is the same number of stitches across and the same number of rows. So this is 12 stitches across and 5 rows, and this is just single crochet. But you can see that the size N hook makes a lot larger of a swatch. I'm trying to not get my fingers in the way, but basically it's taller and it's wider. And it's just a lot bigger than the other one, right? So it's airier and it's bigger. And so that's the difference, right? So if you're looking at the same number of stitches, this is the same number of stitches, right? The bigger one is gonna take more yarn. And that's why you see that 17% difference. So for that example, you know, you're using the same pattern. The larger hook is gonna give you a project that's about 40% bigger. So I'm comparing I to N hook, remember. You're gonna get a project that's about 40% bigger than if you use the I hook. So that correlates very nicely to the millimeters, right? So this is 5.5, this is 10 millimeters. So it's about 40%, a little bit more, but about 40% different, right? So you're gonna end up with a project that's about 40% bigger with only 17% more yarn, right? So interesting facts, but regardless, if you are using the same pattern, the smaller hook will use less yarn. Now, if you're going for the same size though, right, you're gonna have a much airier, looser final project with the size N hook, and therefore it'll use less yarn. So some ways that you can use this to your advantage is if you are following a pattern, right? You found a pattern that you like, you don't actually really care if your end project is the same size as the original pattern. A good example of this might be like a little lovey blanket or a security blanket for a toddler, right? You don't care if it's a little bit smaller because they're just gonna be dragging it around anyway. Smaller might even be better, right? So you could go down a few hook sizes from what the pattern calls for. You'll end up with a smaller project, but it will use less yarn and it'll save you some money if that's what you're looking for, right? And maybe you just like the look of a smaller project too. So regardless, the smaller one will use less yarn. Now, conversely, if you need it to be the same size, right? You want it to be a certain size, but you don't really care if it's light and airy. So maybe you want to make a throw blanket and you don't care if it's a looser, lighter blanket. Then in that case, you can go up a couple hook sizes, right? And side bonus, it's gonna work up faster because you're going to have fewer stitches. So fewer stitches, faster, but also less yarn. So you can go up a few hook sizes. Now, a couple times when you wouldn't want to do this is, number one, if your project needs to be the same size, right? So think about making a clothing item, a sweater or a dress or something like that. You need your project to be the same size as the original pattern or else it's not going to fit. So in that case, you're going to want to make the gauge swatch as suggested and figure out which hook gets you the same tension as the original pattern, and you do want to use that hook. You don't want to change it. Another reason you wouldn't want to change it is if the density or the airiness of the fabric does matter. So the best example that I can come up with for this is pot holders. You can crochet pot holders. You do not want them to be full of holes because you will burn your hands. So in that case, do not go up a hook size or 2 or 3 to try to conserve yarn. You need that fabric to be nice and dense and not airy. So stick with the suggested hook size on that. So I really hope that this information was helpful for you. I found this really interesting for myself and helpful, and just kind of an interesting tip for changing the hook sizes. And you can experiment with it, see what you like and dislike about changing hook sizes too, especially now that you know how it's going to affect your project. If you did find this video helpful, check out some other videos on my channel. I really try to make helpful content that could be useful for you in your projects. So thanks again for watching, and I really appreciate it. Have a great day.